how many of you skipped breakfast this morning? A few of you? Okay, I want to apologize in advance because we're talking about food a lot in this series called Join the Table. I didn't. I knew it was coming. I had a bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios before I came, so I'm all set. I'm good to go. But we're going to be talking about food through this series, so that's just fair warning. You should eat before you come Sunday mornings. Make your life easier. As we get going in this, I want to think about your all-time favorite food. Right? We're not talking about snacks. I'm talking about like the feasting, like that you would eat at a table like this. If you could eat anything, what would you eat? Like, what is your go-to favorite meal? Venison. What was that? Tacos. Pad Thai, steak, fried chicken. Okay. So I could go for any of those things, but I do have a hands down winner. If you want to know if it was my last meal and I had to choose one thing, it's easy. It would be all you can eat sushi. All right, so all you can eat Japanese actually, and not at an all you can eat place. I mean, I'd go to an a la carte place and then I would eat all that I can eat because the quality's better and I just want a whole bunch of it. Right? And I could eat a lot. So I would eat like all this like white tuna sushi and salmon sushi, my favorite, like green dragon rolls and udon and teriyaki steak and all the tempura. And I would eat until I was full. And then after that, I would go to the bakery down the street and get a big slice of cherry pie with a giant like dollop of whipped cream on it. And I know they don't go together, but it's my last meal, so I can eat whatever I want, and those are my favorites. Then after supper, I'd go to the cafe, and I'd get a really good cappuccino breve, so I could walk it all off, right? Just drink it and walk. And you want to have balance, you want to be healthy, so you got to walk that stuff off. So now that you know what you would eat, you remember that, you have one in mind, complete with like dessert and drinks, and what you would eat for your go-to meal. I want you to remember, kind of the other side of that, the time in your life when you were hungriest. You picture a time when you'd gone without food for a few days or longer than normal, what that was like. And I remember that I once did a 3-day fast where I voluntarily went without food for 3 days. And at the end of it, I was very hungry. And the truth is, it was meant to be a 7-day fast, but I was so hungry at the end of 3 days, it got reduced to a 3-day fast. Another time I was in the hospital for a period of days, about 72 hours, and based on when I was admitted and procedures, and it was about 72 hours that I went without eating. I was very, very hungry. So you've pictured your favorite food, you've pictured the time in your life when you were the hungriest. Now put those two things together. You're the hungriest you've ever been, and then you get to eat your favorite meal. How satisfying would that be? How good would that fried chicken, those tacos, the venison, the steak dinner, how good would that taste? How satisfying would that be if you were that hungry and then you got to eat your very favorite thing? Well, I want us just to be mindful of that as we come into this series all about feasting and eating and the table. We're going to talk about that a little more. I'm really thankful that I live in Canada, and I really have never known hunger. Like, I've known hunger voluntarily. There's been a couple days in my life where we went without, but I come from I've never known no food. Like when I'm hungry, I go to the fridge and I eat. And actually, usually it's before I actually start to feel hungry, I go to the fridge to eat. Like when I'm bored and there's nothing to do and it's commercials, I go and I get something to eat and I eat. We really don't know in our country, for the most part, like there are people in Canada who are hungry. I'm not blind to that. But for those of us who are sitting here today, most of us, we don't know what it's like to be hungry and not be able to do anything about it. But what I want us to see as we get into this is that we actually hunger for more than food. All right, and so while we may not know physical hunger, there's another type of hunger that affects many people, maybe most people, and certainly there'll be some people here today who know this hunger. And I'm talking about a spiritual hunger or an emotional hunger. And while your bellies may be full, that you know that even after a great meal, there's still an emptiness inside. Like I still feel like there should be more to fill the emptiness inside of me. And that's a spiritual hunger or an emotional hunger. And I would say that there's a difference between spiritual and emotional hunger, but they are similar, and I'm talking about the two of them together today on purpose. But we hunger for more than food. We hunger for things like meaning and intimacy, fulfillment, community, purpose, joy. We hunger for relationship and connection and love. And while there's very few people in my sphere of influence that know physical hunger, there's a lot of people who know this hunger. This loneliness, this emptiness, this kind of hopelessness, this lack of value and self-worth. There's a famine in our country with this sort of hunger. People just longing for a relationship. Florence and the Machine, many of you will have heard the song. She's a popular artist. In June, her song Hunger hit number 1 on the Billboard Top 100. She says this in her song, again, it's titled Hunger. It says this. This is verse 1. At 17, I started to starve myself. I thought that love was a kind of emptiness, and at least I understood then the hunger I felt, and I didn't have to call it loneliness. We all have a hunger. We all have a hunger. And she repeats that 4 times. It's a very powerfully written song. Like it's an ugly subject, but she writes it so well. And what she's saying is that she was so emotionally hungry. She felt so lonely that she would rather have starve herself to get thinner, to get more accepted, to be valued by her peers. She would rather know physical hunger if that would mean that she would be saved from emotional hunger. We all have a hunger. We all have a hunger. We all have a hunger. And then she continues. I thought that love was in the drugs, but the more I took, the more it took away, and I could never get enough. What she's saying is that in our society, there's a famine for emotional and spiritual fullness. And so she pursued it. She tried starving herself so she'd be thin enough and beautiful enough that people would want to have her in their life, relationship, and welcome her. That didn't work, so then she shifted to drugs just to numb the pain of not feeling welcomed and not being appreciated, not being valued, and not feeling loved. And what she found was that didn't numb the pain either. It maybe masked it for a little bit, but it never was enough. It didn't take it away. We all have a hunger. She sings it, and it's true. When I say we all hunger for more than food, that maybe a spiritual and emotional hunger is even more uncomfortable than to be physically hungry. And so many people that we know in our circle of influence, they know that. And maybe some people here today are experiencing, even sitting in this crowd of people, feeling a hunger for connection and relationship and love and acceptance. So we hunger for more than food. I want you also to see is that a good meal satisfies more than our physical hunger. So think back to your favorite meal. It tastes good no matter what. But it tastes better when you're surrounded with the people you love, right? Like the best meal in my life, I guarantee I didn't eat by myself, right? It always tastes better when the flavor of the food mixes with the sweetness of relationship and conversation and the love of the people who I'm eating with or maybe made that for me or who I made that meal for. It tastes that much better. When I was a kid, just in grade 8, I'd finished home ec, and I was a star in home ec. I could sew and I could cook, and I was really good. I was proud of myself, felt validated, and so I wanted to make dinner for my family. And so I thought, I'll make my 2 favorite things, and I will show them I love them. And so my 2 favorite foods at the time were Yorkshire pudding and chicken balls. And so that's what we ate for dinner when I was in grade 8. What are you, 13? I thought that was gourmet. But my parents, my family felt the love. Because a good meal is about more than the food. It's about the company. And a good meal satisfies more than just an empty belly. A good meal satisfies us relationally as well. We feel connected to there's a power in eating with a person. We feel connected to them. It's one of the best experiences in the world is to share a good meal with good friends. It's powerful. Well, I want to show you a picture of a young man. His name's Andrew Kirby, and you may be familiar with him. His story is going around social media this week, and Andrew Kirby is from South Carolina. He's 16 years old. Andrew was born into fairly tough circumstances. He was born with a drug addiction. He was born with a genetic disorder which causes tumors to grow on his brain, his neck, and his spine. So he was adopted into a good family, it sounds like, but he's had a challenging life. He was off for medical procedures, and so his family describes him this way. They say that Andrew is a great kid, but he's a little bit socially awkward, and you can understand he's had some tough things to overcome. And so Andrew most days eats alone in the cafeteria. I mean, high school can be a tough place, right? It's hard, to find that group of friends who will welcome you and accept you. Well, Andrew, because of his challenges, he's never found that. And so he eats in the cafeteria alone every single day. Thousands of kids around. He's in South Carolina, and he eats and he sits by himself. And so his mom knows this, and his mom loves him and cares for him. So she would ask Andrew, who did you eat lunch with today? And she'd have to look away so that she wouldn't cry when he would say again that he ate by himself, that no one would eat with him. But Andrew would reply this way. He would say, Mom, it's okay, I get on my phone so I don't notice. But of course he did notice, didn't he? I mean, the phone was like Florence in the drugs to mask the pain. The phone is there to mask the pain, but he knew the pain of eating alone. And he was putting on a brave face for his mom, and he was doing his best. I can only really remember in my life one time eating alone. Now, I've eaten alone, don't get me wrong. I've eaten alone, sometimes I'm home alone and I eat and, I'll make whatever. But I only remember once being out in public and happy to eat alone. I remember that was so lonely. I was away at a conference, I was by myself, I knew no one else there. I had to go out for dinner, so I went into a restaurant. I'm in a public place and there's couples all around and people are laughing, joking, and I was at a table for two and it was just me. Sad. And I felt with that feel, I've been, I'm blessed to have friends and family who love me, accept me. I never have to eat alone, but in that moment I felt so alone. And I think the waitress could tell because she came over and she spent, she seemed to spend extra time with me. So maybe she was looking for a date. I don't know. I was there by myself. When you look like this, you got to be on guard against that sort of thing, right? Or maybe she just wanted a big tip. She got one, not both, just in case you're wondering. All right, she got a tip. She did not get a date. Anyway, but that stuck me. That was very uncomfortable. I felt so lonely, surrounded by all those people, because none of those people wanted to know me. They didn't want relationship with me. So anyway, Andrew returns back to school in August. They go to school earlier in South Carolina. He goes to school, and after school, his mom picks him up. He's in grade 10, and he gets in the car, and this is what he says to her. He says, Mom, I didn't eat alone. Some student council members asked me and 3 others eating alone to come and sit with them and said we could eat with them again tomorrow too. I love that story. It's so powerful. I love that story because in high school, you don't get elected to student council because your platform is so strong and people they elect you because you're the popular kid in school, right? It's a popularity contest. And so these popular kids recognize, and there's some kids who are lonely. And they said, you can come and sit with us, and you can sit with us again tomorrow. And the story, if you read the story online, the story goes on, they are trying to arrange their schedules so that he can sit with them next semester as well. These kids just trying to make a difference in this lonely person's life. I love that story. I love that it's getting traction on social media, and it's getting, because when I first started to read that story, and I heard about a kid who had a tough start to life, and then he'd been isolated and rejected repeatedly over and over and over again. I thought this was going to be another suicide story. Or a story where he went into school with a gun and shot up a whole bunch of people. Because that's what happens when we're pushed away and we don't feel love. That's where that can go. But the story takes this great turn because someone said, listen, that person matters. They have value. Let's invite them to eat lunch with us. It's a great story. And so you might be wondering, what does all of this have to do with Jesus and God and the Bible and the church? I would say this, because those student council members were very much like Jesus in inviting that boy to come and sit with them. A good meal satisfies more than our physical hunger. It's powerful. There's a healing that can come to a person who's used to eating alone when they get invited to eat with you. We live in a world that's plagued by loneliness and isolation, and people just feel unloved and unworthy. And man, we could make a big difference. We just invite people to join us at our table. There's power in sharing a meal. All right. Jesus actually teaches us that, and we're going to see that as we open the Bible together now. I want you to finish this sentence before we look anything up. The sentence is this: Jesus came. How would you end that? How would you end that sentence? Just think about it. I'm going to give you a second just to think about it. We're going to look at 3 of the ways that Jesus self-identifies, or 3 of the ways that Jesus finished this sentence for us. But I want you to think about, when you think about Jesus, how would he finish that sentence? Jesus came. Well, if we look at Mark 10, verse 45, it says this: "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So the term Son of Man is just a way that Jesus referred to himself. He identifies to his listeners as a Son of Man. It's a nickname that he gives himself. It's a really loaded nickname. He pulls it right out of the Old Testament. The Son of Man is an Old Testament prophetic term for the Messiah, that God was going to send the Son of Man, and he would deliver Israel from their oppressors. And when he came, all the wrongs would be made right. And so Jesus is saying some things when he says, "I'm the Son of Man." But he says to his friends here, he says, "I, the Son of Man, Jesus, I came to serve, not to be served, but to serve others and give his life as a ransom for many." So when I ask the question, finish the sentence, Jesus came, some of you would have thought of this verse and you thought immediately, Jesus came to serve, not to be served. He came to give his life as a ransom for many. Some of you thought that, and it's true. That's part of why he came. In Luke 19, verse 10, he said this: "Again, the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost." That's why Jesus came. That's how he identifies. He came to seek and save those who were lost, those who were far from God. That's why he came. It's how he self-identifies. Some of you, when I asked you to finish that Jesus came sentence, you would have thought of this verse right away. I want to look at one more, probably not as common, maybe not what came to mind, but Jesus says this about himself in Luke 7, verse 34. "The Son of Man came eating and drinking." Self-identifies as a foodie, right? Jesus and I would be okay, right? I bet he would like all-you-can-eat sushi as well. We know he was a big fan of fish. Normally he grilled it on a fire by the lake, but I think I could convince him that it's better raw. Anyway, he identifies as the Son of Man who came eating and drinking. It's an interesting thing for him to say about himself. We expect him to say he came to serve. We expect him to say he came to seek and save. We don't expect him to say he came to eat, right? He identifies with the table as the table was important to him. And actually, if we continue, if we look at Luke 7:34, it says he ate a lot. It says, "The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and you say he's a glutton and a drunkard." He ate and drank so much that he had a reputation for overeating and overdrinking. That's who he was. Now, he doesn't identify himself as a drunk or a glutton, but people who saw him, his lifestyle, that's how they identified him. And I would say this, that Jesus didn't overdrink. He didn't have a problem with alcohol any more than he had a problem with overeating. But he saw the value in a shared meal. And so he made a shared meal a regular part of his life. And if you look at the Bible, he's forever eating and drinking. And on a side note, the entire Bible, it talks about this a lot. I mean, one of the very first things that God says to Adam and Eve, the first humans, go and eat. You can eat everything in the garden. Eating is important. There's pictures in this. Jesus, just as he approaches the end of his life, he sits down for another meal with his friends. He goes, "I want you to do this regularly to remember what I'm going to do for you tomorrow." A meal reminds us of the cross. He wants us to do it. We go all the way to the very end of the Bible into like the last 2 chapters of Revelation. Our eternity is described as a wedding feast. Right? Eating plays a big role. Jesus came eating and drinking, and he drank and ate so much that he got a bit of a reputation for overeating and overdrinking. He didn't overdo it. These were just his detractors who had such uptight rules and regulations about what they could eat, what they couldn't eat, that they labeled him a drunk and a glutton. What I want you to see, can we just go back one slide? A and B are Jesus' mission. He came to serve people and give his life as a ransom for many. He came to seek and save those who are lost. He found them, and then he gave his life to save them. Those are his mission. C is his method, right? So what he did was come to save, and the way he did it, he sat down and he ate with people. He drank with people, and he shared relationship around a table. We're going to look at why that's important. And of course, it all led to the cross and him dying for our sins. But if we read through the 4 Gospels, the 4 accounts of Jesus' life, he's forever just slowing down and saying, can we just have lunch together? Because he understood the power of investing the time around a meal and just getting to know a person and valuing them. And it went a long way. All right, let's continue. Tim Chester, who wrote a book called A Meal with Jesus, which is where we're basing this series on. And I would encourage you, if you're looking for a great book and you're not afraid to have your life turned upside down and reorient the way you live your life, Tim Chester, A Meal with Jesus. You can get it on Amazon. He says this, Jesus' mission strategy was a long meal. Stretching into the evening, he did evangelism and discipleship round a table with some grilled fish, a loaf of bread, and a pitcher of wine. If you get into the Gospels, it's meal after meal after meal. Father Robert Karras says this about Luke's Gospel. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus is either going to a meal, at a meal, or coming from a meal. And it's true. I get into it and read it. He was always eating. So in this series, over the next 4 weeks of Join the Table, we're going to look at some of the meals of Jesus. We're going to look at some of these encounters he was a man in demand. He was busy. His schedule was full. He was forever slowing down and saying, I value you. I want to get to know you. Let's have supper together and we'll get to know one another a little better. So we're going to look at some of these stories over the next 4 weeks. Today, we're going to look into Luke chapter 7. And this is one of the first meals that get recorded for us. And let's look at it. It's Luke chapter 5. I don't know why that says 7. It should read 5. It says, later as Jesus left the town, he saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at his tax collector's booth. Follow me and be my disciple, Jesus said to him. So Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. Now it's a crazy story. Levi has a successful business in the tax collection business, thriving. He's doing very, very well professionally. He's got lots of money in the bank. Things are booming. And this itinerant teacher who's new on the scene, no one knows anything about him. He's not done any amazing miracles yet. He shows up on the scene and, hey, Levi, why don't you come and follow me, be my disciple? Levi puts the close sign on the window, packs his bag, and he begins to follow Jesus. That is crazy. If you were Levi's mom or dad or his brother or his friend, you'd be counseling, this is a terrible decision. Why would you leave this practice to go and follow this man who has nothing to offer you? And I would say this, because while Levi's life was full professionally, his life was empty relationally. His life was empty spiritually. See, in this day and age, Israel was under Roman rule. Romans had come in and they'd conquered them, and they were ruling in Israel. They were oppressing the people, and they were taxing the people of Israel. But rather than collecting the tax themselves, having Romans do it, they would have other Jewish men collect the taxes for them. Well, that made them very, very unpopular, right? And so, to make it worse, rather than just collecting what was required for tax, the tax collectors then would take more, and that's how they got paid. And so guys like Levi were very, very unpopular with the rest of the Jewish community because, number one, they're working for the enemy, and they're taking their money and giving it to the enemy, and then they're taking more of their money and keeping it for themselves, and there was nothing a Jewish person could do about it because Rome was ruling, and Rome said it was okay as long as they got their money, they were happy. So all the Jewish person could do would be to shun the tax collectors, to ostracize them, to have nothing to do. Yeah, here's my taxes, and then I want to see you ever again. Like they had no relationship. So a guy like Levi, while successful from a business standpoint, was empty relationally. And he was empty spiritually. So Levi closes the door on the shop and follows Jesus. The next couple verses 29 and 30, it says this. Later, Levi had a banquet in his home. He had a party with Jesus as a guest of honor. Jesus was happy to come. Why? Because Jesus loves a party, right? Many of Levi's fellow tax collectors and other guests also ate with them. But the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law complained bitterly to Jesus' disciples. Why do you eat and drink with such scum? All right, so I've got in parentheses there, tax collectors and sinners. That's actually what it says in the original Greek of the Bible. The translation says scum. I like the word scum. It kind of gets at the heart of what these religious people felt about tax collectors and sinners. But you need to know, why do you eat and drink with such tax collectors and sinners? And so Levi, he begins to follow Jesus, and he begins to develop a relationship with Jesus, and he thinks Jesus is the greatest guy he's ever met. He knows all about him. He knows what he's done. He saw him in the tax collecting booth, and still he chose him. He valued him. He loved him. He said, I want relationship with you. Come and follow me. Be one of my disciples. I will associate with you. And so they go. this has been so transformative in Levi's life, he wants to invite everyone he knows. So he throws a party and he invites them. But who does he invite? Because no one likes him, because he's taken money from all of them. And so who does he invite? He invites other tax collectors, because they don't have any friends either, and they'll probably say yes to the invitation. And because they get ostracized and rejected, and they don't get invited to too many parties. And so they invite them, and they come. And there's another group of people that Levi invites to this party with Jesus, and it says at the bottom, "Why do you eat and drink with such tax collectors and sinners?" But what I want you to see is that Levi doesn't identify them as tax collectors and sinners. Jesus doesn't identify them as tax collectors and sinners. And Luke, who wrote the book, doesn't identify them as tax collectors and sinners. The Bible's not identifying them as tax collectors and sinners. The Pharisees, the religious people, the people who felt superior, they identify them as tax collectors and sinners, scum in our translation. If you look earlier, as Luke describes the scene, he just says there were tax collectors and other guests. From Luke's standpoint, from Levi's standpoint, and from Jesus' standpoint, these aren't sinners, these are guests. Guests or sinners. To Jesus, they were another person who was valuable and had worth, and he looked forward to the opportunity to sitting down around a table and eating together and drinking together and getting to know one another. Just to become friends, to communicate, you're valuable, you have worth. How do you view them? That's what I want to ask Celebration Church. When you see a person who's a little different than you, who doesn't live a lifestyle, understand this. We're all sinners, right? When we're honest, we know that. The Bible even tells us, in case we don't believe it, we all fall short of God's glorious standard. We're all sinful. The religious people are identifying these sinners who are probably the worst of the worst, all right? The people whose sin was obvious and open. It's not one you can hide in your bedroom or hide at home. It was lifestyle choices. There may have been criminals involved. But Jesus doesn't see them as criminals and sinners and the worst of the worst and scum. He just sees them as guests at the party. Someone who God made in his image, who has value and worth, and just wants to reach into their life and over dinner love on them. All right, well, the story continues. They've asked Jesus' disciples why he eats with that kind of people, and Jesus answers them. He says, "Healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they're sinners and need to repent." What is Jesus saying? He's saying, I know who they are. I know that everything in their life isn't as it should be. I know that they've made some wrong choices. I know that they've made some bad choices. I know that there's a sickness that needs to be dealt with, but the cure is not pushing them away. The cure is embracing them. The cure is loving them. The cure is inviting them into a relationship, because you see, the real problem with sin is sin separates us from God. Sin separates us from relationship with him. And so what Jesus has done is, if the problem is separation, I'm just going to love them. I'm going to solve the issue, and rather than there be a separation, I'm going to say, come and eat, and let's have relationship with one another. Every time Jesus sat down to a meal with someone, he was enacting grace. It was the method he used to fulfill his mission. He was able to seek and save and to serve as he invited someone to come and experience relationship with him around the table. Tim Chester, who wrote the book again, he says this: "This is why eating and drinking were so important in the mission of Jesus. They were a sign of his friendship with tax collectors and sinners. His excess of food and excess of grace, they're linked. In the ministry of Jesus, meals were enacted grace, community, and mission." And so over the next couple weeks, we're going to look at this. How, when Jesus sits and eats with someone, is grace expressed and community expressed, and how is his mission fulfilled? But what I want us to see today is that when Jesus sat down with a meal with someone, it was him demonstrating his grace. It was him doing exactly what he came to do. The end result of Jesus coming was that we would know relationship with him. And so, rather than just talk about it, rather than just teach like the religious people would like him to do, he said, let's do it. Let's get to know one another. Let's have a relationship because I love you and God loves you, and I want you to understand this. I want you to experience it. Every time Jesus ate with someone, he was enacting grace and fulfilling his mission. There is a lesson in that for us. The power of a meal. A lesson in that for us as a church. There's maybe nothing more relational than sharing a meal with someone. It's so personal. It's such an opportunity. You're sitting across the table from each other and you're looking into each other's eyes. And there's something about food that just breaks down walls and brings healing. We're able to share and engenders trust and relationship. Actually, the word companion, which means close friend and relation, it comes from two Greek words. It comes from the word kam, which means together, and panis, which means bread. A companion, a friend, is someone you share bread with, someone you eat with. Like the actual definition of friend way back is someone you ate with. And so when Jesus would sit and eat with people of all sorts and all types, he was saying, I want to be your friend. I value you. You're someone I want to get to know. You're someone I want in my life. Carolyn Steele says this: few acts are more expressive of companionship than the shared meal. Someone with whom we share food is likely to be our friend or well on the way to becoming one. If you're a lonely person, the best way to maybe solve your loneliness is to solve someone else's by inviting them to lunch. Now that's hard. I get it. But what I really want you to see is that you could solve someone's loneliness by inviting them to lunch, just like the student body when they invited Andrew and the others. What I want us to see in this story with Jesus and Levi and his friends, whoever they were, is that Jesus eats with everyone. Right? There's no one off the guest list for Jesus. There's nothing in our lives that would have Jesus say, no, I don't want a relationship with you. Like, no, I don't want you in my life. Jesus eats with everyone. He's got room at his table for you. He's got room at his table for me. Everyone you know, there's room at Jesus' table for them. Jesus eats with everyone. Well, there's another story I want to look at very quickly this morning, and it's actually in the promo video for this series. It's actually a much longer video, which is a modern telling of the story. And we're going to look at that in our community groups. We may post that on Facebook so you can watch it. It's just very well done. Retells this story. It's found in Luke chapter 15. In Luke 15, Jesus is telling three stories. We're only going to look at one, but it's important for us to see why he tells this story. Luke 15, verse 1 and 2. This is why he tells the story. Tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees and teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. Right? It's the same problem. Religious people always want there to be separation and distance. And if you get too close to someone who's not just like you, they could rub off on you and it could be bad for you. And Jesus lives completely opposite to that. He says, let's eat. And so he's eating again. All right, so Jesus tells these three stories. And we're only going to look at the third one. In this story, there's a farmer who has two sons, and the young son comes to his dad and says, Dad, I want my inheritance, which is fairly rude. I mean, that's a rude thing to say to your dad. It's as if you're saying, I wish you were dead. I would rather have the money than have you in my life, right? Just give me the money. And that's exactly what it does. Dad says, okay. And he splits up his inheritance, and he gives this young son the portion that would go to him. And the son doesn't stick around and enjoy a relationship. The son runs. He leaves town, and he goes away, and he begins to live a lifestyle absolutely contrary to the lifestyle that the father would have him live. Contrary to the lifestyle that the father had taught him to live and that the father had demonstrated and modeled. He runs off, and he squanders the money, it says, in excessive drinking and prostitution. He ends up bankrupt. He burns through all of it, and life gets so bad for him, he finds himself sleeping in the pigsty, and the only thing he has to eat is the food that the pigs didn't eat, right? So how bad is that? Like the stuff that's left in the bottom of the trough, that's all he's got to eat. His life is a mess, right? Which is a result of his own bad choices, and he did some things that dad didn't want him to do, and it led him down there, but that's where he gets. And so he's lying there and he's thinking to himself, this is no good. This is not the life I want. He begins to feel this gnawing emptiness inside him. He said, I don't deserve to be my father's son. But my father is a very good man, and maybe if I go back to him and I plead for mercy, I don't expect him to invite me back into the family, but maybe he'd let me work as one of his hired hands. Like maybe I could work on the farm and sleep in the barn. That at least would be better than where I'm living right now. So he says, I'm going to try it. And he begins to make his way home, and he rehearses his speech in his head a bunch of times, how he's going to apologize, how he's going to sell it to Dad. And it says that as he got close to the farm, the father was on the edge of the property, and he was scanning the horizon, looking for his son to come home. And it says that he ran out to him and greeted him, and he embraces him. And the son tries to get his speech out, but the dad doesn't let him speak. He throws his arms around him and loves him. In verse 22 to 24 of Luke 15, it says this. But his father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. For this son of mine was dead and now is returned to life. He was lost, but now he's found. So the party began. More eating, more drinking, more partying. Why? Because it pictures what God wants for us. It pictures that God wants us into a relationship of life and celebration and intimacy with him. And so this son had made a mess. And in this story, you're the son. I'm the son. We're all the son, and the Father is God. And what God wants us to see is that he loves us. And he just wants relationship with us. And he wants to make room for us at the table. And so he throws out the feast. And he kills the fatted calf. And he puts out the best... what do you call this stuff? What's the fancy word? Plates and knives and forks for me, but I know there's better words, all right? And he pulls out the chair. And he asks his son, the son who had been so rude and so disrespectful, and he said, this seat is for you. Come and sit. And what I want us to see is that God is saving a seat at his table for you. But there's a spot for each and every one of us. Like he never sets up just enough for the people who are there. He always sets up an extra place setting. He has a spot reserved for you. He's saving a seat at his table for you. He sees you as valuable and full of worth and someone he wants relationship with. And he demonstrated that through Jesus. And every time Jesus sat down with him, it was enacting his heart for relationship with people just like you and me. And so he's got a place at his table reserved just for you. And Jesus promises all of us who are empty, he promises us fullness. He promises us that those of us in North America, like, I don't need to eat anything else. Like, there's no shortage of food. But so many of us know what it's like to be lonely, to feel unloved and unworthy, unappreciated, like we don't belong, like we got passed over again, like we don't matter, like we don't belong anywhere. And Jesus is saying to you, I've got a place at my table for you. Come and eat. And so we want to extend this invitation to join the table, to hear God's cry to you that he loves you and he values you and you have worth to him and he wants you to have a relationship. So we're going to sing a song about this. I'm going to encourage you just to stand. And I want you to, as we sing this, I want you to hear God's invitation to you to come and join the table.